Solutions that people are going back to are again going to be familiar to you. That keep the fiscal deficit targets, bridge the gap, and there is a revenue shortfall. There's no denying that. Bridge the gap with asset sales, sure. Which is the better or the more acceptable option. Or then there are people saying that hey, go to the RBI for capital. I want your views on both.
Right, so let's start with the first one. The first one is the easy option, right? That is the way in which India has its cake and eats it too, which is basically go and does proper privatization and in much larger quantity than in the past. By proper privatization, I mean privatization where the public sector assets, whether it's a government or that of the public sector, is actually sold to the private sector and not to another part of the government or the larger public sector. So we really do not want one side of the larger public sector financing another side of the larger of the public sector. That doesn't really mean, doesn't really do very much to the overall demand of resources from the public sector on the economy as a whole. I would argue that going for the transfer of reserves or the saving or the capital of the Reserve Bank of India to the government. Look, there's a question about what you want to do with it. The debate seems to be whether or not it's legitimate for the government to take RBI resources, and the answer is yes, it is. Number one. Number two is that there is no such thing as an optimal level of capital reserves for a central bank. Central banks can run with no reserves at all. Central bank can run with negative reserves, and that has almost no impact on monetary policy. Many central banks have done that. So in principle, the reserves can be transferred. The question is, what does the government use that to fund? If the government says that, look, I'm going to use that to fund, let's say, recapitalization of banks, I'm just using it as a proposal, then you are taking capital and you're replacing it with capital. So asset is being used to substitute asset. But if the government actually uses that to fund current spending, whether it's capital like roads and railways, or it is current spending, wages, etc., then there is a problem, because that adds to the fiscal deficit. So I would be okay if the government says, look, I'm going to use this reserves to basically recapitalize the banking system, and against that the banks will have to put in place much better, much stronger governance structures, etc. I would think that's a perfectly legitimate way of doing things.
Jahangir, I have a follow-up question on the first part, the asset sales part. I'm surprised that everyone is putting so much emphasis on asset sales right now, knowing fully well that the capacity to invest in these assets from the private sector is very limited right now. Look at what's happening to large companies. Deleveraging process is still going on. There's deleveraging now at the promoter level. So who's going to put this money? Is it going to be foreign capital? Does foreign capital have the kind of appetite for, say, a company like Pawan Hans? I don't know that it does.
Right. So you do asset sales for two reasons. One, you do asset sales to raise revenues, which is, the usual way in which we sort of build consensus to do asset sales, saying that, look, we are in a tight spot and therefore we need the money and therefore we are doing it under duress. That's a political economy sort of posturing that we need to do. There's another reason as to why you want to privatize. You want to privatize in order to bring in more efficiency and in order to bring in better management and better performance in these public sectors. I think the second one, can be done at any point in time, because the second one is not dependent on what value you get. The value you're going to get is not the monetary value, but the value you get is the improved efficiency in these organizations or in these firms that you're privatizing. The reason why you want to run out of value at this point in time is clearly because there is a genuine budget constraint at this point in time. Look, if we are going to wait for the right valuation to come about, and look, subsequent governments have waited for the right valuation for many of these asset sales, right? And none of them have actually worked out, turned out to be right, because the government isn't really ever in a position to sell assets when the market is doing well, because when the market is doing well, the government is also doing well, and if the government is doing well, there aren't any pressures. So unfortunately, historically, it will always be the case that when the government wants to sell assets, it is when it is under distress. But when it is under distress, the economy too is under distress, and the market too is under distress. So I really don't think we will ever get out of this dilemma that you really want to sell when the market is good, but when the market is good, you are going to face serious opposition in trying to sell assets, because the question will be, why do you want to do it?